Nina pressed her charcoal pencil against the paper, dragging it in deep, rhythmic loops until the lead snapped. She left the desk behind, pushing through the classroom door and into the cooling afternoon air. She sprinted across the yard, diving into the damp earth where the rain had pooled. She dug her fingers into the soft, dark soil, coating her palms until they turned heavy with gray grit. She did not stop when the lunch bell echoed against the brick walls. She snatched a sandwich from her bag, ignoring the dark specks gathering under her fingernails. From the kitchen doorway, her mother pointed at the sink. "Nina, scrub those hands with soap." Nina held her hands high, wiggling her fingers in the light. She shouted back, "They look perfectly clean to me." She turned her back to the house and bit into the sandwich. The dirt crunched between her teeth, a sharp, gritty sensation that she swallowed without a second thought. She walked back toward the climbing frames, her grip tight on the remaining half of the bread, leaving dark smears against the crust as she went. The sun dipped below the horizon, but the warmth did not reach Nina. She sat curled on the bed, her knees pulled tight against her chest. A sharp, twisting ache bloomed in her abdomen, forcing her to drop the pencil she had been holding. She tried to steady her breathing, but a wave of nausea surged, turning her skin cold and damp. She turned away from the kitchen, unable to face the smell of dinner, and collapsed onto the cushions. Every movement brought a fresh spike of pain that made her vision blur. She could not hold anything down. By the time the moon hung high, she was shivering, her strength entirely spent. The next morning, the house was quiet. In the classroom, her desk remained empty while the teacher called the roll, and her friends sat in their usual rows. Nina lay motionless in her room, the sunlight hitting the floorboards where she should have been standing. The house felt hollow. The silence of the hallway contrasted sharply with the distant, imagined noise of the schoolyard. She stared at the ceiling, waiting for the door to open, feeling the heavy, undeniable weight of her mistake. The bedroom door clicked open. The doctor walked to the bedside, his movements precise and measured. He did not speak at first, instead placing a cold, circular metal instrument against the center of her chest. He listened to the rhythm of her breathing, then pulled a thin tablet from his bag. He swiped across the screen, bringing up a high-resolution image that seemed to pulse with dark, jagged shapes. "Look here," he said, tapping the center of the glass. Nina leaned forward, her eyes fixed on the display. The shapes moved, shifting and multiplying in the magnified space. "These are germs," the doctor continued, his voice steady. "They exist in the dirt you played in. They travel from the soil to your food, then straight into your belly." He held up a solid bar of soap, turning it in the light. "Water alone is not enough. Soap breaks these things apart so they wash away." Nina stared at the screen, then at the soap, the reality of her illness clicking into place. The dirt she had once ignored was no longer harmless. It was a carrier of the very things causing her pain. Her perspective shifted, the world revealing a hidden, dangerous layer she had never considered until this moment. The doctor remained by the bed, his hands moving with purpose as he lathered the bar until a thick, white foam bloomed between his palms. He held them out, showing the transformation. Nina watched, her focus absolute. As he packed his bag and left the room, she pushed herself up. Her muscles were weak, but her resolve was sharp. She walked into the bathroom, the floor cool against her feet. She reached for the faucet, gripped the handle, and turned it until a steady stream of water hit the porcelain basin. She reached for the soap dispenser, pumping it 3 times. A viscous glob settled into her palm. She placed her hands under the water, feeling the temperature change, and began to rub. She worked the soap into a dense, bubbling lather, pressing her palms together, interlocking her fingers, and scraping the foam under every nail. She did not rush. She watched the gray residue spiral down the drain, replaced by the clear, clean flow of the tap. She scrubbed until her skin felt tight, and the smell of the soap filled the small room. She rinsed her hands, watching the last of the bubbles vanish. She dried them, feeling the texture of her own skin, clean for the first time in days. She stood at the mirror, her eyes clear, acknowledging the change in her own hands. The following week, the lunchroom was loud, filled with the scrape of chairs and the hum of conversation. Nina sat at the table, her hands resting flat on the surface, clean and steady. She felt the strength returning to her arms, the lingering weakness of her illness finally gone. Her gaze drifted across the table where her younger brother sat. He reached out, his fingers dark with soil from the morning session, and grabbed for an apple. Nina moved instantly. She stood up, reached over, and caught his wrist before he could touch the fruit. He looked up, surprised, but she did not let go. She guided him out of his seat and toward the sink at the back of the room. She stood him on the stool, turned the faucet, and pumped a generous dollop of soap into his palm. She placed her hands over his, showing him the motion, rubbing his palms until the white bubbles lathered up between their fingers. She made him scrub until every trace of dirt vanished. He rinsed, dried his hands, and looked at them, then back at her. Nina nodded, satisfied. She walked back to her desk, gathered her things, and stepped out onto the playground. She climbed toward the frames, ready to run again, but this time, she carried the knowledge of how to stay safe.